Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today, Mark. Looking forward to chatting. I think we'll have some fun stories, both past and present, that we can dive in. But maybe just real quick, if you want to introduce yourself and what you're currently doing.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me. And yeah, as we're talking, I'm like, my brain is already churning with the history lessons that I've accumulated over the years. Yeah, right now I'm doing a few things. I'm working a little bit with a company called Coalfire. We do a lot of assessment and compliance work, and pretty globally, a lot of government customers as well. But I would say I spend most of my time. I'm on a number of startup advisory boards. I'm an investor in a number of cybersecurity startups. So I spend a lot of my time in the startup world, just talking and helping some of these young companies and young entrepreneurs kind of get their feet underneath them, and figuring things out,
Yep.
figuring out how to run a business. They're all way smarter than me, from a technical perspective, but they've never managed people before, and they've never had a budget before, and they've never had to write insurance policies before. All of that kind of stuff that just goes with
Yep.
running a business. So I help them with a lot of that kind of stuff.
Very, very cool, man. We'll probably have some crossover stories as we go through things, because I think we both go back on some areas of information security. But maybe just kind of take me to the beginning. Even before information security, there's always usually kind of what got you into technology and kind of down this path, in the very first place.
So, it is kind of an interesting story. Maybe I grew up on a ranch in Northern California, and I joined the Navy, and I had no idea what I wanted to do in the Navy, and they decided that I was suited for the intelligence world. So
Okay.
so I went into the intelligence community, and I actually went into the cryptologic community, and I spent a few years, and I ended up going to grad school in the early 90s, and I wrote my graduate thesis on information security in 1994.
What was the angle that you were going for with that? Like, what were you writing about?
Yeah, well, there was a program in the Navy at the time called GMSIS, the Joint Maritime Information System, GMSIS, and
Okay.
and basically I did a security evaluation of that program based on everything that was happening in the world at the time. We were coming out of this very proprietary world and starting to use more open source stuff. The Rainbow series was still kind of the Bible that we lived
Yep.
by, and so I just kind of took. And at the time, the internet we didn't have an internet at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Google wasn't a thing. So I just did a lot of research on the security controls that had been developed for this program, and it kind of blew up. It opened up a lot of doors and a lot of questions about security that kind of set the stage for the rest of my life. It set the stage for the rest of my career in the Navy, for sure. So that's how I got into it, writing my thesis. And again, just to show you how old I am, in 1994, there was nobody writing anything about security. I mean,
Yep.
there were maybe 100 people in the world that, and I tried calling every one of them,
Yep.
and so it was an interesting time, but that kind of set the stage for my life and my career.
That is very, very cool. And I think from a timing perspective, there was somewhere in the early days there that you also got wrapped up. I don't know at what level. Maybe you could kind of tell us, but there was the kind of way before security incidents were branded. Going back, there was the Moonlight Maze incident, and Not sure how involved you were with that, but anything that you want to kind of walk folks through on that, because I think that was the same kind of mid late 90s
Yeah,
ish.
yeah, it's kind of late '90s, and so yeah, I think it was through 1998 or something like that. My last job in the Navy, I was at the Fleet Information Warfare Center in Norfolk, and I
Okay.
was running a new program, which is today is the Navy's 10th Fleet program.
Okay.
Um, and so we were doing basically we were the Navy's cyber organization. And so I was there, I got there right after Moonlight Maze. So I spent a lot of my time kind of helping figure out exactly what happened and then cleaning up some of the mess of Moonlight Maze.
Gotcha.
But it was also during the time of, you know, of website hacks, website defacements. And literally, my
I can't
life
say that I was a
revolved.
teenager doing that at the time. Wink, nod. you know,
It's
I'm
funny
sure we
and
ran into each other. There was
probably.
the 100 professional cybersecurity people, and there was the 200 not so professional folks. So that was probably in the mix with you there.
Oh my God. It sounds funny in retrospect, but literally my life revolved around for quite a period of time, getting into the office in the morning and saying, okay, what Navy websites were hacked and defaced overnight? So we would then have to go and follow up and try to figure out who to contact, at a Navy base somewhere to tell them that they had a problem. And most of them, it's much better now, obviously, but
Yeah,
half the time we couldn't even find out who owned the website, or who managed the website. And we'd
totally.
end up calling some Navy captain, some commanding officer and say, hey, your website's been defaced. And he goes, what the hell's a website? And,
Yeah.
so
Well,
anyway,
it's interesting too, because nowadays when you think of websites, it's like the infrastructure is typically like very separated, right? Like you're kind of,
yeah.
I don't know, public facing, I don't know, Navy base website. It's not necessarily tied to anything important, but back in the day, it was like you'd be on the web server and there's all the other like important critical systems, right?
Everything.
Everything's there. So it's like the website defacing was like the definite, like the visual everybody's seeing, but it was a hop and a skip, everything else
Oh,
being interconnected. And I think it's interesting on your timing because of right after Moonlight Maze, because I think that was one of the very kind of what we'd maybe call like APT now. That was like one of the first, like very focused kind of cyber espionage campaigns. And so I imagine that was, I mean, our industry's had many wake up calls over the years. There's always these different inflection points, but it seems like that at that point in your career, you were basically kind of right on one of those first major inflection points. And do you think it created, obviously, it created, in a way, a lot of incidents do, some temporary awareness, but did you kind of find as you were going through where there was a lot of awareness because of what had happened there, and so a lot of focus on security, and then sometimes enough distance goes from an attack, and then the kind of awareness drops off, and you're almost like waiting for the next incident? I'm just wondering, have you seen that kind of cycle in your career, or how you think about that?
yeah. I'd like to say yes. It was a wake up call, and we learned from it, and I think we did. I mean, obviously, for those of us in the intelligence community, it was a very frightening time to know that people had gotten into to some of the systems. There are some like missile guidance systems. They were classified information. It was a lot of. It was a
Yep.
pretty scary time. But you said something interesting, and I've been saying this for a few years now. Is like, we don't need any more wake up calls. What the heck? I mean, we've had enough wake up calls. And I think, maybe to your point is, I'm not sure we're ever going to learn the lesson. I mean, that
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but, there've been there have been multiple Moonlight Mazes
Yeah.
since
Yep.
Moonlight Maze, but and that's on the government side. You know, you look what's happening in the commercial side of things, and you know how many times does Sony and Equifax and you know everybody need to get hacked before we um, start devoting more of our you know intelligence and information and resources against that. And you know that's
Yep.
one of the things that you know in the later parts of my career, you know, I've become less of a technologist and more of a policy guy. So I spend a lot of my time today, you know, trying to influence policy, trying to influence legislators or regulators on how to craft standards and legislation that you know that don't create unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's a small but important nuance of what you just said, that like don't create unintended consequences, because it's always hard, right? Like you want to try to figure out what is some kind of good best practices that are a bit one size fits all prescriptive, but it all can be very different, company to company and risk tolerance and everything else. Is there some things that you've kind of seen throughout your career of just the ways that you would, especially we have a lot of folks that are kind of newer to security that are, maybe listening in on the podcast, but just ways that you think about security generally, right? There's always the kind of new tool, new product, but just how do you fundamentally think about like the role of security?
Yeah, I think let me tell you a story,
Yeah.
and maybe it makes the point. Again, I grew up like most of us. I grew up, configuring firewalls. I grew up writing malware. I grew up, being on the very technical side of things. But when I became a CISO, that became much less a part of my job than influencing the business. So here's the story. A friend of mine, and obviously not going to say who it was or what company it was, invited me to come in and give his board of directors an intelligence briefing. So, and this was a Fortune 50 company. It was many years ago, but so I gave my briefing and sitting there with the board, and then the CISO, he starts giving his briefing to the board, his regular quarterly CISO briefing, and one of the board members, actually was the chairman of the board, he asked the guy a question, and he didn't really know how to answer it, which was almost like a little bit of blood in the water, and the sharks start attacking.
Yeah.
So he asked another question, and then somebody else asked a question, and pretty soon, this was like a defining moment in my career. The chairman of the board said to the CISO in front of everybody, he said, "You don't know how this company makes money, do you?" And I'm like, holy crap. This guy was so focused on the technology, he was so focused on security, he really didn't understand the business. So,
Yep.
so for anyone listening, you have to understand the business.
100%.
People don't care about security for security's sake. They only care about security because it helps the business keep running.
Yep. That is, can't stress that point enough, right? And like your ability to be able to tie it to the business in that way, to do the right storytelling. I've often said like those are the skills that, of course, yes, you got to understand the technology and what's out there and what good looks like. But you're never going to get any of that done if you can't speak at the level that you're describing, right? If you can't connect it to how the business is actually making money, how they're thinking about things, the risk levels, and there's also like a nuance of, I think a lot of times, security teams, if you don't if you don't kind of lead at the right level like that, it can a lot of times just be like, we'll have this magic security team that's going to keep us from getting hacked. And you're not really having like a risk conversation where it's
Yeah.
ultimately up to the executive team, the board, of what level of risk, and kind of getting them in the boat with you. Right. But you have to do that through talking about, through the lens of the business, and not, your next 5 technical security projects that people aren't necessarily going to understand, and it's not going to be tied to anything.
Yep. So
yeah.
you probably remember, a lot of people don't remember this. The Cliff Stoll wrote the book on the Cuckoo's Egg.
So good.
So good. I mean, it was
we'll
like,
put it in the link to the show. It's just it's like to me, that's a must read classic that just,
that is the book that got me involved in security.
Nice. Okay.
So, but he has a quote in there at the end of somewhere, I forget where in the book. It says, when he was on his speaking tour after the event was all wrapped up, and he was trying to do what we're talking about. He was trying to convince people that, that they need to pay attention to this. He said, I thought all I had to do was show the data. He said, I had tons of data. He said, that didn't do it. You have to learn how to tell a story. And I tell you, if, to be a CISO today, if you can't tell a story, you are not going to be effective.
Yep. Look, I can't agree more. When I actually first came back to BeyondTrust a few years ago, I was kind of doing a webinar on like CISO kind of leadership, and my very first thing I said is become a great storyteller, right? And like, there's a lot of us, we get into security, we come from technical backgrounds. There's varying levels of just how much are you a storyteller and personable in that way, and everything else, right? And it's like, it's a skill to hone without a doubt, and to like actively work on, because it's a world of difference. And it's typically the difference of the security team that ends up kind of culturally having nobody gets it and nobody cares, and you're just all frustrated. And sometimes you gotta kind of look in the mirror and be like, well, are we actually connecting it to people in a way that they're going to understand, right?
For sure.
Because it's too easy just to be the why don't they get it?
If you're a CISO and you're going to your board, you have got to, most of your board is not going to be, they're not only are they not security people, they're not technologists. They're CFOs and insurance people. And I mean, so not only don't they get it, they really don't care about security. I mean, if they didn't have to spend 1 minute thinking about security, their life would be great, but they have to. So we have to talk in their language. We have to figure out how to speak in their language.
Yep, 100%. What do you think on, like, I've had friends too that sometimes when they're working in security, there's always the kind of like growth track of becoming the SOC manager, or maybe you're managing like information security engineering, or you're becoming the CISO. And one of the things I always like try to tell friends too is like, there is something to be said about like, go for the things you're passionate about, right? And kind of as he described, some of the stuff as you get up, it's a little less hands-on. It's more, how are you connecting things to the business? How are you like clearing a path for the team below you that is trying to do that technical security work? Is there other roles kind of throughout your career that you thought were fun aspects of security? Any specific types of security disciplines that you've enjoyed?
Oh my gosh, that is such a loaded question.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I could think, back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, when I was a CISO and I had a SOC, and I felt like I was an expert. I mean, I could go and I could sit down in the seat of any one of my people, and I felt like I could do their job. Maybe not great, but I could do the job. But today, I mean, the landscape has just exploded with tools and disciplines that, when sometimes people will introduce me as a cybersecurity expert, and I want to say, wait a minute,
I,
I
I,
am not a
I hate when,
cybersecurity
yeah,
expert.
I'm doing a webinar or something. They're like, and here's expert security guy Mark, and
Oh,
I'm like, oh my god, there's so many things I'm dumb about.
I am a mile wide and an inch deep. And I know a lot. I know a little bit about a lot, but I guess to answer your question, you said it. You have to find out what you love to do. There, I mean, I don't know. I decided at some point I'd kind of, done a lot of things. I said, okay, the next stage of my career is being a CISO. And I did it, and I'm like, okay, I kind of like this. I like the responsibility. I like, I like owning the entire game. I like working with very technical people who are, again, way smarter than me most of the time. I just really enjoyed that level of responsibility. Now, I mean, I will say I've never been fired, but there have been times when I deserved to be fired because I just made dumb decisions and
It,
or overstepped my bounds, from a responsibility perspective, and made decisions that as Maverick said, or I forget what your ass is writing checks that your brain's writing checks your ass can't afford or something.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
What
so
you've had some pretty interesting CISO roles. I think at one point you were the CISO for the state of California, right? Like,
yeah,
what's that like? Because one thing that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if there's a parallels here, but I know in working with uh, some government organizations, it's just different than commercial for a whole variety of reasons. There's compliance, regulatory, there's all that kind of stuff. But sometimes just how things are set up organizationally. Like I remember one time I was helping a CISO of a large university, and they essentially were not like a corporate environment where they're kind of like setting the standards where it's like thou shalt do whatever. It was like they're essentially trying to cheerlead the various like university departments of like, well,
yeah,
I hope you do all these things. So it's kind of an interesting, difference. Not that I believe that even in a commercial, company, it's you always want to get people bought in, right? Versus just kind of throwing down commandments from the top. But yeah, curious what that was like, navigating, being a CISO, I think also for state of Colorado, but what was that like for doing that for an entire state?
yeah. So yeah, Colorado and California, and yeah, at the time, so Schwarzenegger hired me to come to California and be the CISO, the first CISO, and based on what I had done in Colorado. So at the time, California, and it was kind of it's kind of a foot stomping, chest stomping thing. We were the 7th largest economy in the world. I mean, and there were 63, I think 63 is the right number. There were 63 different departments, agencies, boards, commissions, councils, etc. I mean, it was like, and each of these are like their own company, their own organization. And
Yep.
some of them are elected officials, some of them are appointed officials, some of them are career government people. So you have to manage. How do you, so the first thing I did was I wrote the California state security policy. This is how we're going to do security in the state of California. And then I had to go on on my charm campaign to
Yeah.
all of these different organizations to say, okay, here's what it is. Here's how we'd like for you to do this. And there was a lot of politicking there. There was a lot of schmoozing there, glad handing there. And I would say, there's a lot of very big organizations that have plenty of money, plenty of resources. You have your franchise tax board, you have Health and Human Services, Department of Motor Vehicles, but you have a lot of these other really small organizations where literally it's just like they have one IT guy and he's responsible for everything. So I had to really figure out how I was going to help these smaller organizations who didn't know anything at all about security, how I was going to help them to kind of step up. They're never going to achieve, the level that I wanted them to achieve, but how could I help them incrementally get better? And this is where, again, where the CHAR campaign worked, because I was able to work with some of the CISOs for some of the bigger organizations and convince them to share some of their resources with some of the smaller organizations. In fact, we put together a matrix at the time and said, okay, here's all the firewall guys. Here's all the checkpoint firewall guys. Here's all the Palo firewall guys that we have in the state. Here's all of the malware people we have in the state. Here's all. So we kind of broke down all of the different security disciplines or security areas of expertise. I knew where every one of them was in every agency. So when somebody had a problem, I could call, the Department of Motor Vehicles and say, hey, can you send John Smith over here because they need him? So, we were able to kind of leverage resources from the big organizations to help the smaller organizations.
It's a smart strategy. And I'm curious, when you were doing some of the kind of state level work, I know after some of that, you were eventually the chief security officer for NERC, which is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or basically a whole lot of critical infrastructure related. And so did you went along your kind of timeline? I know critical infrastructure has been something kind of important to you and that you've done a variety of work for. Was that something that you got exposed to kind of earlier on in your career? Or I imagine, being CISO, we have a lot of state, local governments that we work with, and OT and everything else is a huge part of what they're trying to secure. When did you kind of first maybe get exposed to that, OT, although some of this is before, we had OT as a phrase even. I remember talking more about SCADA back in the day and whatever else. But when did that kind of come on your radar?
So again, going back to my Navy days, when I first joined the Navy, I spent almost 2 years learning electronics. I mean, I had a couple of pieces of equipment that I was the expert on. I was responsible for, and so I knew how electronics work. I didn't know how electricity works. I mean, I knew the basics of electricity, Ohm's law and that kind of stuff. But what happened is, a friend of mine, Mike Asante, God rest his soul, Mike Asante was the CISO at NERC, and he said, hey, I am leaving. I've recommended you to be my replacement at NERC. And it was kind of at the end of the Schwarzenegger administration. I knew that I was going to have to go because he couldn't run again. So I interviewed, I got the job, and literally I felt that I didn't know anything at all about the electricity industry. So NERC was basically responsible for setting the security compliance requirements for the entire electricity industry in North America, about 3,000 different electric utilities. So once again, I kind of leaned on my good nature, and I got to know a lot of the CISOs and a lot of the electric utilities around the nation, and I just got smart about the critical infrastructure. And that was kind of, even though I'd had some relationships with the legislatures in the state of Colorado and the state of California, when I was at NERC, I actually got introduced to the federal legislature, the late legislatures that's writing laws around critical infrastructure. I was in DC at the time with NERC, and so I spent a bit of time getting to know a few legislators, and they would call me up to brief some of their staffs occasionally. I did a couple things for a couple of congressmen, and that's where I kind of started making the shift to say, I think this policy, actually really understanding how to make policy, is
Yeah.
equally as important as understanding how to run a SOC or how to be a CISO. Because I had to step in to talk about, again, unintended consequences we mentioned earlier. I had to step in several times, both at NERC and at a later role, step in when they were crafting legislation and say, wait a minute, what you're getting ready to do, you haven't thought of all of the implications of this. You know what you want to accomplish, but there are a lot of unintended consequences. You're going to break a lot of glass that you don't even realize by going down this path. So we're able to kind of steer them in the right direction.
So what do you like? I know a lot less in the kind of policy realm. Like, what are some of the things that you think when you're trying to figure out the balance of like what might be a good policy that, you know, pushes security forward but isn't too cumbersome? Like how do you think about that? Like, what else can you say from a policy perspective in that realm?
Man,
Not like a easy answered thing, but I'm just kind of curious. It's not something.
No, that actually is an easy answer, I think.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that I always tell them is like, you need to go get an expert to come in here and tell you how this works, because they don't understand. One, they're not technologists, and two, they're not experts on any of this critical infrastructure. Yeah. So, you know, if you're making pipeline policy, go get some pipeline experts. And because, you know, it's much easier to craft policy that works out of the gate than to have to go back and unwind policy. It's very, very difficult to do that. And I tell this, you know, almost every speech I give today, I say, you know, if you don't know who your legislators, both at state and the federal level are, you need to know them. And you need to call them and say, hey, here's what I do. I know a little bit about electricity or oil and gas or telecommunications. If anything ever comes up, call me. I'm happy to be a resource for you. And you would be surprised how many times I still get I got a call last year out of the blue by some little water agency in Northern California that said, hey, we're getting ready to buy some technology. What do you think? Now, you got to be kind of careful there. You know, I don't want to steer them to my friends and steer them away from other people. But, you know, you drop those breadcrumbs along the way in your career, and they will come back to you at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, you know, there's obviously a whole variety of, you know, regulations and new laws. Do you think there's any kind of areas that you think we're you know, at kind of whatever level, like really not paying attention to, or we're kind of like behind in terms of thinking? I mean, I can obviously immediately go to like AI. We're all still figuring out what does any of that mean, but so maybe that's too obvious of a one or something, because I feel like that's all kind of in the works. But yeah, curious if, you know, it could be you know, in the AI realm, or just
I think it's
that we're, you know,
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think it's AI, it's IoT, it's, you know, and we the security community have been our own worst enemies. And I say that from the perspective of, we haven't done a good job. So Congress feels compelled, both at the state and the federal level, feels compelled to jump in and do something when we have not done enough. And, you know, we talk about, I was just reading a paper the other day, and I'll think of it in a second. But we talk about, you know, the baby boomers and Gen X and Gen Y and Gen Z. And I read a paper, it's called The Best Generation. And it was around security. It's like, yeah, us security people have really screwed this up. We haven't solved the problems. We've spent millions and billions of dollars, and we still have security incidents. Maybe it's time to give this best generation a chance, give them some credibility that they actually know what they're talking about. It's an interesting paper. I think it was actually written
Yeah.
by CERN, I believe.
Okay.
But the point is that we the security community are to a large degree responsible for some of the legislation, some of the policy, because we haven't done a good enough job. Now,
Yeah.
I don't mean that to sound like a criticism, because this ain't making cookies. This is hard stuff.
Yeah, I always like when people equate it to like, well, we have car safety laws and stuff like that, but I'm like, yeah, this isn't just like that. That's more reliability stuff. Like reliability is hard enough, let alone some of these like actively trying to throw wrenches in the system, right?
Oh my God!
It's
the other thing, the other piece of this, we might as well talk about is the threat, and it's that 20 years ago, if China or Russia attacked the United States or a company in the United States, the federal government would step in and take over and get involved. Whether it was DOD or some other intelligence organization. Today, our company, we're responsible for it. We're responsible for going toe-to-toe with Russia. How freaking fair is that? I mean, it's an unfair fight. Even not even Russia, but think about some of the APT, some of the criminal gangs. They have way more resources and way more time, by the way, than most companies do. And they're focused on one thing. We're focused on a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, I've always shared one of my last CISO roles. I was asked by like the CEO of the company. They were, it was equivalent of the question of like, how are you going to keep us from getting hacked? And I was like, I'm not. I'm just going to try to make it a really good story, right? Because it's like for the particular company, I won't name them, but let's just say they definitely had some very advanced sort of folks that would want to go after them. And it's one of those things that, in the face of some nation states and other things, I mean, it's extremely hard. And we talk a lot even at BeyondTrust of like, ultimately you're trying to do the right things, that like the day will come, but hopefully you've limited the kind of blast radius, about it as early as possible. You have the ability to respond quickly, and the kind of overall impact of the incident is not as bad, right? Because it is going to happen.
I've been saying this for years, that and obviously this is not a black and white. There are some nuances, but I think the difference between a good security organization and a not so good security organization is how quickly they can identify a problem, respond to that problem, and get back in business. Yeah. If you can't do those three things, you can have all the best technology in the world. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If you're not staying in business, it does not matter.
Yeah. No, that's exactly, man. I mean, when you think about, we've talked a couple concepts that are like, to me, the timeless parts about security, and like we were saying, there's plenty of technology that's always evolving, changing, the whole new world that, I think about like my kids, and the world they're going to be living in with like generative AI and the chat GPT of the world. It's just different things, but there's always these kind of core concepts. So when you think about, maybe new people that are getting into security, you mentioned some advice earlier as far as kind of like following your passion and stuff, but any other advice that you'd give to folks that are kind of earlier in their security career, of how they should approach things?
Yeah. This sounds so dumb. I almost embarrassed to say it, but you have to do what you like. I mean, sometimes we're forced to take jobs or do things because we have to make a paycheck. I get that, but that's not a career that's going to be satisfying for you. Find what you really, really like to do, and figure out a way to make it work. And
Yep.
I think one of the things that we as society probably has not done, or maybe has done a bad job, is I in the early days of cybersecurity, we were creative. We had to be creative. We
Yep.
didn't have tools. We had to figure stuff out with baling wire and duct tape. Literally, I am not kidding. And so I think we've kind of, I don't want to say dumbed down. That's the wrong way to say it, but we've had so many resources at our disposal that we've lost the creativity edge in many ways. And figuring out how to make something work with bubble gum.
I
But
like it.
but
I think that's the MacGyver reference there.
Yeah.
If I put that out.
Yeah, but I think, I tell you what, I wish I was 20 years younger right now. I am so excited about artificial intelligence.
Totally.
I mean, it is like, every time I say this, I get chills, but it is literally changing our life as we're sitting here talking right today.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways that it can go. And I think we have just barely scratched the surface of what AI and Gen AI and
100%.
AGI is going to do for us. And I am right now, I'm working with a company called Gretel, and they do synthetic data. And synthetic data is really, doesn't solve the security problem, although it can. It really solves the privacy problem. Synthetic data is really, it's artificially generated data that looks, smells, and feels like real data. It kind of mimics the characteristics of real world data, but it doesn't contain any of the actual information or privacy related or PII from individuals or events. So if you think about it, everybody needs data. In fact, there have been a few articles over the past couple of months of the world's running out of data, and people are getting concerned that, data is the fuel that runs AI. Without data, there's no AI.
Yep.
That's it. So I think synthetic data is a way that we're going to solve this lack of data, because synthetic data can be, researchers and scientists and developers, as they're looking at models and algorithms and systems, they need good, clean, quality data, and you can do that with synthetic data. So that's one of the things that I'm just stoked about it right
now. No, absolutely, man. There's definitely a bunch of great points in what you just said, and I think it gets mentioned, but just to underscore one of the things of and it's always interesting because there's privacy implications, but data is one of the true values for a lot of companies, where a lot of times especially these days with like AI and everything becoming more abstracted, easier, right? Like it's if we go back in some of the history of what we've been talking about, I mean, there's been various forms of AI machine learning for quite some time now, but the accessibility, the ability to just take a data set, quickly throw it into a system, and then now you're having a full-blown chat conversation or whatever else. I'm hand waving some things, but it is crazy, the level of abstraction and kind of ease at which you can do it. And a lot of the value there does become like what is the unique data of your business, right?
one of the top 3 questions I ask a startup when they come to me and say, "Hey, do you want to be on my advisory?" One of the first questions I ask them, they'll go through and they'll say, "Here's what our technology does. Here's the problems we solve." I ask, "What's the value of your data?" And about 50% of the time they look at me like, "What do you mean?" But the other 50% of the time, the light bulb goes up and they go, "Holy crap, we're getting all of this very unique cyber data or threat data or vulnerability data. Holy crap, there's some value there."
Absolutely. No, it's that's such a great question that you asked that. Not surprised given our conversation. That's a super insightful question to be asking, and definitely for any startups, founders, existing companies, right? I mean, I think sometimes the the established companies where you've been around for some time, you kind of lose sight of some of those core questions. One of the things that was interesting for me the few years ago when I was coming back to BeyondTrust, I had just been leaving a CISO gig that I was doing for let's just say a space company, doing some work, and I was very focused on kind of identity security as like a new plane. It's the kind of through line on most breaches, compromise the right identity that has the right level of access. And one of the reasons I had previously been CTO of BeyondTrust, but one of the reasons that I came back beyond love the people, culture, all this, is that in what the company does from a privilege access management perspective, there's an amazing set of data
Oh
and
my
defined
God.
understanding of like, what are all your identities? What are all the privileges? What does good and normal look like, right? Where if you're just trying to bolt on identity security type of work from the outside, you could miss that. And so I think there's even times where you have to, definitely as a startup, it should be a central question you're thinking about. And I also think it's important for like security teams. You mentioned earlier, there's the how do you understand, or do you understand what the business actually does to make money, right? Like you have to know the business if you're going to secure the business, and like can't underscore that enough. And there's also the interesting stuff of a lot of times in security, we think very narrowly on like the kind of known security tech data sets. Like what's my Active Directory doing? What's my Azure and AWS doing? And there's a lot of times these interesting data sets that are specific to the company without getting into specifics. One of the company I was referencing earlier, they, for example, had a whole variety of physical security. And one of the things that we found is that there was great ways to kind of understand based on the physical security badging system data of understanding employee presence to then tie that back to the normal kind of SOC detections
Mark,
you would do.
I was going to say that exact same thing. I was working with a company that does physical security and badging, and they realized, wait a minute, we can write a few chat GPT scripts and we can figure out who's all in the building right now. What rooms are they
absolutely.
in? What are they accessing?
Yeah,
where have they been over the past 24 hours?
Absolutely. So, no, it's a great example, because it's like, I always go there's the kind of, hello world security detection stuff in our industry, like impossible travel or whatever. And then, you try to do it in a simplified way and you get all these false positives or whatever. And like, look into your own kind of company and data set and correlating. And, there is something to be said of what you were saying earlier, right? Not every company or organization is resourced and has the people, time, money, right? So that's, I think, something I always think about a lot on the vendor side, right? Is how do we kind of, the stuff that I might have been able to do at previous companies with the right in-house resource, how do I try to build products or solutions that kind of democratize that for everybody is a good way to be thinking about it. But man, I could keep going with you. I feel like you're my my spirit animal over here, but maybe just to close things out, when you look back, I mean, we just for folks listening, I mean, we've like barely touched on your career is the way I've put it. You've done so many things, but is there any moment that you're kind of or maybe an inflection point of your own kind of career and understanding that you're most proud of over the years?
Well, there's probably a few of them. I would say, I worked in the Obama administration
Nice.
at DHS, and somebody sent me a photo. I'd been in a meeting with the president and the cabinet in the I forget which room it was, but somebody sent me a photo, and I'm sitting behind the president. I'm like sitting 3 feet behind the president. Like my knees are on the back of his chair, and I can remember, when I saw the photo, I remember back in the media, I'm like, holy crap, I'm just this farm kid from so California, and I'm sitting here. I could literally reach out and touch the president. Of course, Secret Service would probably shoot me in the neck second. But being being a leader in a big organization, and having all that responsibility is just to me. I don't know. It was it was one of the best and one of the worst times of my life, because having all that responsibility. I mean, I was on 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
When I went on vacation, they said, "Here's your sat phone. You have to take this with you because we have to be able to contact you." So, but growing up, I mean, I was just a regular guy. I'm still just a regular guy. But that's why I think, your point that you've made several times is, what can people get out of this? Not everybody wants to be a policy person. Not everybody wants to go and work in government organizations. And I'm like, hell yeah, good for you. But find what that passion is. And man, if you can't be excited about the security industry, I just don't. I don't know what would excite you, because this is the most exciting business I think there is. It's a hell of a lot of work. It's frustrating. It's maddening. But my gosh, when I still feel it. I feel like we are saving the world every single day.
I love it, man. And, we started at the beginning of, I think you had mentioned you wrote your graduate thesis in like 94 or so on information security. And very clearly from then all the way till now, the passion comes through, man. And I've just really enjoyed chatting with you, and we'll have to do it again sometime, man. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. It's good to kind of dredge up some of these old memories.